Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 Sustainability Week for the Eco-nomics Unscripted podcast. My name is Cecilia Corey, and today I'm joined by Matt Offord to start your morning with some sustainability. Thank you so much for joining me today. Could you please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. My name is Matt Offord. I'm a leadership scholar at Adam Smith Business School. So I teach leadership and management at undergraduate, postgraduate level. And increasingly, I'm using something called eco-pedagogy, which is to get students outside and thinking about responsible leadership in terms of sustainability of the planet.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. For this week's podcast episodes, we're going to start with introducing our topic for the day, debunking some associated myths, and then leaving you, our listener, with a few core takeaways. So to introduce the topic a little bit, what is eco-pedagogy and what does an ecological business school mean?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question to get it started. So eco-pedagogy, if I can say this very, very quickly and simply, is based on some of the ideas of the educational philosopher Paulo Freire, who developed the pedagogy of the oppressed, which was to try and move away from these colonial ways of educating people. And before he died around the turn of the century, he started talking about not just how students in educational systems are oppressed, but also the planet. So it became about people and planet. And then the Ecological Business School is an idea that I've been developing based on the Ecological University, which was developed by somebody called Professor Ronald Barnett. And that's the idea that universities exist largely at the moment to maximize their income. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. That's just like the situation we're in. But he's observing that in the future, universities may move to a more ecological sort of setting. So my idea really was, well, really, what about the Ecological Business School? Could we do that? So that's the kind of idea that I've got.
That's really interesting. And what kind of distinguishes this idea of an ecological business school from a traditional business school that simply offers sustainability modules?
Yeah, that's a really topical thing to say, actually, a question, because lots and lots of business schools obviously are being driven by governments and by public pressure and to some extent businesses to do more sustainability. But it can become a little bit of a tick box exercise, so incorporating the UN Sustainability Development Goals, for example, is a step in the right direction. But does that make an ecological business school? To my mind, not, because the ecological business school should really engage with multiple ecosystems. So that wouldn't just be nature, but also knowledge, politics, economics, the law. There's all these different ecosystems. So yeah, it's a step in the right direction to do UN SDGs and do a course about that or something. But really, I'm hoping to explore whether business schools can go further than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think making sustainability not just a tick off is such an important thing to truly live that sustainability rather than feel like it's an objective or a force. Do you believe that a business school can genuinely become ecological if it continues to kind of teach, like we spoke about, perpetual growth and profit and maximizing value as the default objective of a firm?
Yeah, again, that's a really interesting question because, a lot of the language around this growth and profit versus sustainability and things. And I think that it's interesting because that's the way we think about it today, but that wasn't always the case. So I think if you think about like management, if you go back a long way back, like 2000 years, to philosophers like Xenophon, who spoke about running a business. In this case, it was a farm, but he spoke a lot about how to make that sustainable, how to make that something that was going to nourish the people in that area as well as the environment. So this idea that running a business is all about making short-term profit is probably an idea that we have today. Milton Friedman really kind of encapsulated that. But he was observing businesses in his time and really just saying this is what businesses do. But there is something that's built into this idea of management, which is about sustaining. And, to use a really old-fashioned and gendered word, but is like this idea of husbandry, where you're conserving resources in order to make profit, not just now, but in perpetuity, perhaps. So I think it's a question of how you define growth. And if you deplete the resources, while you're growing, then you also simultaneously reduce your growth potential.
Yeah,
So
in future years.
yeah, yeah.
No, I think that's really interesting. That's something I think that in many modules at the business school are taught in subtext, but hearing it straight out is actually really positive to hear. So now we're going to move on to debunking some beliefs around sustainable education for our listeners this morning. So starting off with the first myth, is it true that ecological business education is anti-growth and anti-capitalist if it's maybe not teaching that profit as a end term?
So I don't believe that it is. So again, I think it comes down to what is growth and what is capitalism. If we were to go back to the UK in the interwar years, where there was a huge growth in business education, it was very much around kind of business leaders were serving their societies, they were serving the country. It was sort of patriotic at that time. And thrift and management of resources was like a key part of what industrialists were doing. That was capitalism, and that's how they saw capitalism at that point in time. Now we look at capitalism in a different way, but that doesn't mean to say that that also won't shift. And I think this is what's coming into the agenda now, is a lot more reversion to these ideas of thrift and conservation and management of resources, because obviously we're running to the end of some of our resources.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, and very topical as well. So our second myth today is the Ecological Business School just rebranding sustainability to sound or be a bit more radical?
So I think that's definitely a risk. There's a massive risk there. You know, like any business school will have a whole cohort of marketers. In our case, we have marketers who are kind of leading the world in terms of market research. You've got a lot of people who are very good at marketing. So I think, you know, there's always this kind, and there's a sort of marketing mindset. So there's a risk that is attached to that this becomes a marketing exercise. So I definitely think it's a risk. But if it's done properly, the Ecological Business School, it should actually be quite radical in terms of what we perceive now. But I also think that when we look back in maybe 20 years' time, it might not seem so radical, because it might just seem like, yeah, no, we had to do that because things were happening with climate and that really forced our hand. So I don't think it's necessarily radical, but it might seem that way.
Being that Glasgow world changer and moving to like transforming and taking that first step, I think is actually a good thing. You have to be brave and sometimes a little bit radical or outspoken. So, okay. And for our final myth, what do you think, where is that balance between teaching the values in business school when education should, in concept and theory, be neutral?
Yeah, again, this is just personal to me. So I don't like to teach values. I'm a leadership scholar, so it's important to me that people understand that values are important for leaders, but I leave it for the students themselves to decide what those values are going to be. I mean, obviously there are certain limits within that. There shouldn't really be something that's inherently harmful, but I don't believe personally, and other educators might differ, and obviously they may have different views, but I don't think it's my job to teach students what values they should have. But I would like them to go out into the world, to notice things and to see where things are wrong and develop their own values around that.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of everyone being so different and being from different walks of life, is everyone has different values shaped by their experiences. So I think that's a great idea to have in an ecological business school, combining those international perspectives to be the world changers that the U of G students are said to be. So yeah, so moving on to kind of the endpoints of our podcast, these are straight for the listeners. If you could speak directly to staff and students, what is one assumption in business education that needs to be critically re-examined right now, whether that's in how we teach it, in how we take the knowledge, just what's one thing that you as like a field leader would pass on?
So I think that we have a problem in the sense that the research that we do, and we're doing, you know, world-class research, it's done in a way that is normally, not always, but normally is kind of what we might say is a perspectival approach. In other words, we look at the world as if it is something outside of us. and we make those observations, and that's kind of like the way that science quite often works. But I do also believe that what we're missing is the opportunities to be in the world rather than detached from it. And this is where I think leadership particularly comes in, particularly around sustainability, responsible leadership, and so on. It's about being in the world and noticing how things impact, particularly as a leader. Even what you say has an impact in shaping the world. So it's actually noticing that as somebody who is in the world, learning by doing. So that for me is the key thing that I would like to really advocate in business education.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, trying to be more present in that the change that like your actions inspire. And also there's so much noise in the world, whether that's like your phone or like screens and university itself. So although it's like you're taking a step back, take a step more into that, be that present and kind of hear about the planet and around. So for our last little myth, actually takeaway today, is that there's a lot of anxiety about the climate and economic instability. We hear a lot in the news. We can see some changes, but a lot of changes aren't happening very fast or in front of us. But if you had one message of grounded hope for staff and students to leave our note on today, what would that be?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I wouldn't dismiss that anxiety. There is a thing called eco-anxiety, and I was listening to a program about it on the World Service a couple of weeks ago. And people are genuinely debilitated by it because of the news about climate change and so on. And it's a rational position, to be honest, because we have the science that shows that climate is heating up more quickly than it would do naturally. So I wouldn't like to dismiss that, the way people feel about it. But what I think as well is that humanity has survived really drastic climate changes in the past with a lot less knowledge and technology than we have today. So it's possible for us to do that again. But I think the issue becomes, at what point do we engage with that in a major way? Because the earlier that happens, the smoother the transition will be. So I feel personally quite hopeful that it's not an extinction situation, let's put it that way. But it's like I would quite like for humanity to have a smoother transition rather than leave it to the last minute where it's going to be rough.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Just, we have them being present and kind of like starting it head on as our key takeaways today. Thank you so much for your new perspectives on the Ecological Business School and your time today. We hope this was informative and helped debunk some myths. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you for having me.
Of course.